Hi, and welcome to the Deep Dive. It's really great to have you with us today. We're going to be taking a really close look at some specific sources talking about international efforts related to Gaza right now, specifically something called the Global March to Gaza and, the wider protests and movements around it. Our main source for this discussion is an interesting one from the Westferry Times podcast. Their episode was titled Walking to Gaza, the Global March and the Fight for Justice. And to help us sort through what this material tells us, I'm joined by our expert guest. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to unpacking the source.
Great. So our goal today really is just to understand what this particular source says about where these initiatives came from, what they're trying to achieve, the sort of global picture, the humanitarian angle driving them, and maybe the political side of things too, all based strictly on this Westferry Times material. Okay.
That's good.
Right. Let's dive in. So first off, this global march to Gaza. What exactly is it, according to the source? Who's involved? When's it happening? What are the goals laid out?
Okay, so the source presents it as a pretty significant international effort. It mentions a coalition of 150 NGOs and activists.
150? Wow.
Yeah, and from 31 different countries. The timing, as laid out in the source, is mid-June 2025.
Mid-June next year.
Okay, that's the plan. Participants are apparently set to gather in Cairo, June 12th specifically.
Right.
Then the source says they'll head to Al Arish, and from there the plan is to actually march on foot.
On foot.
On foot, yeah, towards the Rafah border crossing into Gaza.
Okay, marching on foot certainly sends a message. What about the objectives? What does the source say they're aiming for?
Well, the discussion highlights a few key things. Stopping the ongoing violence is one.
Okay.
Delivering humanitarian aid, that's crucial. Also trying to break the siege on Gaza.
Which the source implies means tackling restrictions.
Exactly. Restrictions on movement, goods, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then exposing alleged crimes by the Israeli occupation forces. That's mentioned.
Right.
And finally, urging legal action for breaches of international law. That accountability piece seems important in the source's description.
That last point, the legal action, accountability, it sounds like, according to the source, it's not just about aid. There's a strong political and legal element, too.
Precisely. The source definitely portrays it as multifaceted. You've got the direct humanitarian side, but also this clear political statement and these legal demands. It also notes that this approach is similar to other efforts we've seen.
Like the freedom flotillas. I think the source mentioned those.
Yes, exactly. The freedom flotillas. The discussion actually brings up a specific recent mission.
Launched from Italy, wasn't it? Catania.
That's the one. From Catania using a vessel called the Madeleine.
Right, the Madeleine.
The source says it had limited release supplies, but also volunteers. It even names people like Greta Thunberg and the actor Liam Cunningham.
Interesting.
And what's also noted is that this attempt followed an earlier one in May. Another ship involved then was reportedly targeted by drones somewhere near Maltese waters. So the source kind of highlights this persistence, pushing forward despite the obstacles.
Yeah, that definitely paints a picture of determination. Okay, so moving beyond just the march, the source also talks about broader global solidarity. What does it tell us about the wider international reaction?
Well, what's interesting is the source makes it clear the march isn't happening in a vacuum. It's set against this backdrop of really widespread global protests.
Oh, okay.
He gives the key example. Coordinated demonstrations that happened worldwide on January 13th, 2024.
And that date was significant because...
According to the discussion, it marked the 100th day of what the source calls Israel's military assault on Gaza. So it emphasizes this sort of sustained public reaction.
Right, and the scale, especially in London. The source mentioned huge numbers there.
It did. Really striking. The source cites figures of up to potentially 500,000 people marching in London.
500,000. Wow.
Yeah. And their demands, as reported in the source, were pretty clear. An immediate ceasefire and also condemning the UK government's perceived support for Israel's actions.
That's a massive turnout. Did the source mention other cities with large protests?
It did, yeah. It lists several others: Copenhagen, Berlin, Milan, Istanbul, Rotterdam, suggesting this was a truly global wave of demonstrations at that time.
And what was the general message? What were people demanding or saying, according to the source?
Well, the description mentions people raising Palestinian flags, carrying banners. Usual signs of protest. But specifically denouncing actions attributed to the Israeli occupation.
Okay.
And the source highlights demands to end what protesters called double standards in how the world responds to different conflicts.
Implying a critique of international policy consistency.
Seems like it, yeah. And again, that call for accountability for actions taken.
So the source suggests it's a mix then. Humanitarian concerns driving people, but also this push for perceived fairness for accountability internationally.
Exactly. It links that public outcry to a critique of the political responses or lack thereof.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to the situation inside Gaza as the source depicts it. What kind of picture does the discussion paint?
Um, Consistently dire. That's the word that comes through. It's presented as maybe the major driver for all this international activism we've been talking about.
And did the source mention any specific organizations or concerns on the ground?
It did. It specifically brought up the Palestinian Center for the Missing and forcibly disappeared,
Okay.
and highlighted their deep concern, according to the source, about an ongoing Israeli ban. A ban on letting in equipment needed just to retrieve bodies from under rubble.
Wow, that's grim. That detail really underlines the severity the source is describing.
It does, and the source stresses this isn't just about noosh equipment, it's part of broader restrictions.
Right.
It makes the point that even when ceasefires are supposedly agreed, Israel has unilaterally closed crossings. That stops essential aid and this kind of equipment getting in.
So the argument in the source is that this blockade, these specific closures, they're actively making the humanitarian crisis worse.
Absolutely. The discussion frames these restrictions as a direct contributing factor to the terrible conditions.
Okay.
And that, the source concludes, is why these activists see efforts like the Global March as so vital, both to, shine a spotlight internationally and to physically try and get aid past those blockades.
So the source draws a very direct line between the conditions it describes inside Gaza and the need for these international actions.
Got it. Okay, finally, let's look at the political side. What does the source suggest about the potential impact, the future prospects, of movements like the March?
Well, the source is pretty clear that the aim is to apply pressure. Pressure on governments, on international bodies, to actually do something concrete about Gaza.
Does he give any examples where maybe this kind of pressure, or at least aligned sentiment, showed up in governmental actions?
It does mention one instance, yeah, the Arab Summit in Cairo.
Ah.
According to the source, that summit adopted Egypt's reconstruction plan for Gaza. And importantly, it also issued a categorical rejection of any violation of Palestinian rights. So the source presents that as maybe the kind of official response these movements are hoping for, without saying the movements caused it directly.
Exactly. It's presented as an example of alignment, perhaps. Then the source kind of asks the big question, doesn't it?
Right. Will any of this, the march, the protests, actually lead to real change?
Yeah. And the perspective offered in the discussion is, well, it's cautious, but not entirely pessimistic. It acknowledges the huge challenges involved.
Sure.
But it suggests that sustained international pressure, that solidarity, it can eventually influence policy. It can potentially lead to change.
So according to this source, what's the absolute key ingredient for that potential change to happen?
The source really points to maintaining momentum, keeping that global awareness high. That's framed as the critical factor if these movements are to have any lasting political effect.
This has been really illuminating, just focusing on what this specific Westferry Times source presented. Thanks so much for walking us through it.
My pleasure. Yeah, the source definitely provides a clear perspective on the motivations and the scale involved here.
It really does. And it leaves us, and you listening, with something interesting to think about, doesn't it? This idea from this source about the potential power of sustained international pressure and awareness, how that might or might not shift political realities in such a complex situation. Food for thought. Thank you again for joining us for this depth dive. Remember, our source material today was drawn from the Westferry Times podcast discussion, Walking to Gaza, the Global March, and the Fight for Justice. As always, we encourage you to stay informed, stay engaged with the issues that matter to you. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.